The Lord's Resistance Army, LRA war, is perhaps the only insurgency that has been a sore thumb in Uganda and for Ugandans in general. Due to this revolution, the LRA war has painted a grim picture of northern Uganda, making it appear dangerous, whereas in fact, it's anything but. When he lost the support of the population, Joseph Kony turned against the very people he was supposedly fighting for and launched a wave of untold terror and cruelty on innocent people. This is Life Stories. Thank you for being a part of the show. Many times I wish I could tell you stories of jubilation and merrymaking. Unfortunately, I tell stories of ceaseless problems, but it's because in telling these stories, we celebrate and understand the strength of the human spirit. Today on the show, we get to hear stories of females who have been scarred by years of violation, abuse, abandonment, and subjugation by their tormentors in the Lord's Resistance Army War. These are women that were subjected to torture, to rape, to abduction, and all sorts of things that you never could ever imagine. Here are their stories. Among Joseph Kony's signature atrocities was abduction and rape of the girls. The daughters of northern Uganda were soon insecure in their homes, and destiny held a foreboding that no woman should have to go through. They were abducted, raped for days on end, stripping and shredding off any ounce of dignity and self-esteem they once bore. The acts were treacherous, inhuman if you may, and naturally this resulted in the birth of children. Next on the show, we hear Prosy Achayo's story. At only 12 years, this is a person that was a witness, a victim, and a perpetrator. Prosy, how are you today?
I'm fine. Yeah.
Prosy, how did you end up with the rebels?
Okay. Anya Achayo Proscovia.
My name is Achayo Proscovia. I'm a formerly abducted child. I was abducted in 1994 and came back in 2002. Right now I stay in a village called Pecheluku.
Prosy, tell me about the period that you were abducted. What was the progression of events? Did you suspect this? Did you think you were prone to being abducted? And what exactly took place when you were being abducted?
Ikarma kemaga aberu ikenu tiano pamamana la ten mangwen.
I remember it was in the night while we were sleeping at home when the rebels came. I remember my brother, whom I follow, was killed, and my mother later on died of shock. When I was abducted that night, I didn't understand it being a child. But after I had reached where they took us is when I started thinking about what exactly had happened.
No magama chero kere atiku magapa kiken. Ma polwata me chero isudan aberu kawata wara tetwa.
I was 10 years old when they took us to Sudan, but because I was young, I was not always walking. They would carry me on their shoulders or back. They would only make me walk occasionally. It was when I had reached the Sudan, at that age of 10, I was given out to be a wife to somebody. That night when the first sexual encounter, I refused and I cried a lot. The following day, I was put among many people. It was a kind of a parade.
So, Prosy, I understand you were a child then, but in case you can remember, was the place protected? Because this was a war area and abductions were going on. But your area code where you were staying, did you feel safe?
Icharo kamana beriye uno atikilu nyoruna kiken.
The village I live in is an open plain. It is very open, so we were vulnerable to attacks. And that was the reason why that night we were sleeping. I was only with my parents and siblings. When they came in, there was no any kind of defense, and the rebels just came in freely, and I was abducted.
Why did they not abduct the the bigger people around? Because you said your parents were there and a brother and you. How come it's you that they took?
Ikarma ki magani ono jomadon ki nyimatie and inged gangwa ero ni beti jomadon ti ento.
It was a principle of the rebels to abduct younger children because they believed that older people would eventually escape. So that was their tactic of abducting younger children who could not easily escape.
How was the abduction, you know, that the step when you're being taken away from home? Was it come, hold onto your hand, let's go? Was it brutal?
Ichama kimaro an po beru yotti twal pien mamana machalo na nyoruna no peye piera.
It wasn't easy, it was always forceful. I being one of my mother's favorites, it wasn't very easy for her. So when they picked on me and my elder brother, my mother started fighting back, and my brother, being older than me, tried to fight the rebels, and that is why he was immediately shot. So when he was shot, there was nothing else we could do. I was carried away.
Tell me about the progression of events. What do they do when they're taking a number of children? Do they put you in a car and take you? What exactly happened next?
Karma kimaga mi charo beru latien achel mo cheri lum acharo ki wot woro diwo eno ni penyo ruwe wiwa.
As a child, I remember when we were abducted, we walked the whole night. For 2 consecutive nights we were walking. We rest during the day but walk in the night. It was on the 3rd night that we reached the Sudan border, and that was where the fiercest battle was. That's where we met the government soldiers, and they fought from morning till evening. But we managed to cross over. I thought I would not make it then.
So Prosy, what would happen if rebels had abducted children with them and they met government soldiers and war ensued? What would happen? Would they let the children go?
One kalwenyu chake no one when wati line magien lo monchuye.
What would happen was when the fighting started, the rebels who had been fighting before would take the front line. Then with the children, they would make us go in one straight line, running after the rebels as they shoot their way through. They would never let us go ahead or behind because they would fear the government would come and rescue us. So we had to be directly behind the fighting lines, and we would follow them in a straight line.
Where were you taken?
Ikarma warwate kimony obedi boda maranya wakar wadoni Sudan.
It was always tough. When we reached the border, we could first meet the Ugandan soldiers. We fight our way through, and after we had crossed over into Sudan, we would again meet the SPLA, where we again had to fight to cross over until we reached the destination where the rebels were based.
Ikarma waranya wa oi Sudan.
What would happen when we reached the Sudan and we reached the camps? The person who abducted you would take you to his home, and our first assignment was to be a babysitter, a nanny to one of the rebel wives. So it is from there that while you are babysitting that they start training you to do the military training, and after you've done that, then you become a fully fledged soldier. But the very first thing you do is to become a nanny.
What kind of training were you given in the military training?
Obedo training ma kitero wai dilum kang wai kikin lum kiken ne weringe kin mai ramo wai okere kila.
The kind of training we were given, the first thing you would do, they would make you run through the bushes, and that was to teach you how to dodge bullets, how to hide. And after that, you are given a gun, and the instructions you were given was that that gun was your father and your mother, and you had to protect it very well. And when you were given that, you would also taught how to use it.
At some point, you became a soldier and stopped being a wife.
Pagi robedo daro padui, amete kibedo daro padui. Dong nyere ni karma kitergi lwen.
I never stopped being a rebel's wife. I remember when I came back from hospital, the man who had first raped me was taken to the front line and he was killed in that battle. So I was eventually given to another rebel as a wife, but this time it wasn't so bad because I'd had that experience before and I was his 9th wife.
Please tell me about the fighting. What would happen? Because you were taken to the field as a soldier.
E dog lweny gin mobedo ka time ye. Ene ye ka iti lweny ineno to kiret.
Battles were always fierce, and what I know, during the battles you will always experience death and injuries. I saw so many of those, and it was always very hard because when you started fighting, sometimes you would fight the whole day without rest, and you would go without water for even 3 days or without seeing food, but you always had to be on your toes running.
Prosi, how many years did you spend in abduction?
I was there for 9 years. In the 10th year is when I came back home.
What was the biggest challenge in the 9 years you spent in abduction?
My greatest challenge for those 9 years was fighting continuously and never winning in a battle, because we were promised that we were coming to take over the government, but for 9 years that never happened. And then the greatest challenge was thirst. There was completely no water. You stay 5 days minus water, and sometimes you had to look for cool leaves early in the morning to go and lick those leaves to just get a cool and feel that you have taken some little bit of water. So we depended on cool leaves to work on our thirst.
So Prosi, how did you escape?
Long Luina obedo in Sudan, ikaro ni en machalo konyo bedo ka loki dan mapol. Kun wajo ni karo biromo mangara.
It was one night. By then we had started hearing radio communications about children who had escaped from captivity. They would talk over the radio. So after hearing that, I remember it was one night I went to one particular house and I prayed that, God, this is my last night of ever staying in the bush. And after saying that little prayer, I started walking that very night, and I went and handed myself over to the Sudanese army. So when we were taken by the Arabs, they were so angry that so many of their people had died in our hands, and they had promised they were going to kill us. To us, that was a better option, to be killed by the Arabs than to take us back to the rebels. So our luck, our break came when the Arabs abducted us. There was a UN organization that was watching and monitoring our moves. So when we were taken in that barracks, the Arab barracks, to be killed, these people came in right in the night and they told them that we have seen some of the children who have just entered here. So an argument broke out between the UN and the Arab forces. Eventually, we were handed over to the UN forces, who eventually handed us over to save the children.
Me wani chingi wegi kelu about save the children.
Having lived through that horror, Prosi looks none the worse for wear. Somehow, she has found the grace to accept and rebuild her life.
So Prosi, from 2002, when you managed to escape, up to present day, how do you live your life?
Ikaro ni watin wano bien wabedi center kichua. Oidwe me kwanyo lutino me center me duakte.
When we were released, we were taken to a reception center where we stayed for 3 months, and announcements were going on for children who have been released from captivity. I was not picked because it was then that my parents had all died, so I stayed for more months at the reception center. But eventually my mother's sister came and picked me and took me to her home. I never had the chance of ever going back to our village because we were stigmatized by then. They thought we were the killers, we were the rebels, so there was no way I could go back to my former village. I stayed with my auntie for some months, but it was so hard staying with her because she also had a lot of responsibilities. But that was the first stop I had. But afterwards, my little brother, who I had left, who was only 2 years old, had traveled and was living in Gulu town. When he heard about me, he came and picked me and brought me to Gulu. It was much better here because nobody had known about my story about being a rebel. So I came and picked my pieces of life together while I was staying with my little brother. I stayed with my brother for some years, and while I was still at the center, they had taught us some skills in tailoring, and I had a knowledge about sewing clothes. So in 2007, that's when Watoto came in, and they started looking for people like me who were formerly abducted. So that's when we came, because they needed people who had a bit of tailoring skills. That is how I joined Watoto, and the first thing they taught us was the Word of God. It was while in Watoto, when we were taught the Word of God, that I started knowing all about forgiveness. And the first thing they taught us was to learn to forgive and forgive oneself. I gave my life to Christ, and that was the time they started teaching us more tailoring skills. We got a new center, which is Living Hope Center, and that is where I've perfected my skills. I've not gone to school, but because I know that was my weakness, I've put my heart to tailoring, and that is how life has gotten better for me.
Gitiyo ki mege magitiki goro mitu mekarni ene matu slim kidong mege mokene manoki ngolo dogi kidong wano tiang mawadugu kindo.
I'm so grateful for Watoto for whatever they have done for me. If you look at me and look at my story, many people do not believe what I've gone through because of the transformation I've gone through. They have restored my dignity. I'm so grateful, and because of what they have done for me, I'm so willing to be of help to all the others. I'm not the only girl they are helping. There are so many others that they are helping, and I believe this kind of help that we have been given, we are not going to only transform our society, but this transformation will go all over the world, because there are so many people who have been injured, who have gone through this hurt like I have, but there is always hope that things can get better. And when you go back to Kampala, please send my appreciation to Marilyn, who got the vision that actually somebody can be restored back.
Thank you so much, Prosy, for talking to us. Thank you so much for being on the show. Your story has touched me and so many people out there. Afoyo Mate. That's right.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, it's so good to meet you.
Yeah.
And I really want to be your friend. The human spirit has the strength to move on from all sorts of difficulties. You don't have to be an abducted lady or abducted child to have pain. You could be going through so many things out there, but pick strength from people who have gone through pain in totality, like Prosy Achayo, and have the strength to move on. Thumbs up to Watoto Church for what you're doing to restore people like Prosy. We'll proceed with this show. We're going to meet other ladies who will give us their recounts of the LRA war. This is Life Stories. We'll be right back.